Awesome, folks. Thank you for joining us today for our SBIR 101 webinar focused on talking about the SBIR and STTR programs and how you can use them to fund your innovative idea. We're holding this event as part of NMSU's and Arrowhead's Global Entrepreneurship Week, and there's going to be other events later on focusing on different topics. My name is Melissa Tenick, and I am the program manager for New Mexico FAST, where we support small businesses as they explore SBIR and STTR opportunities. We are recording this presentation. We'll send out the recording to everyone that has registered, as well as the slides. And we'll have some time at the end to cover any questions that you may have. Okay, so the purpose of this presentation is to have everyone become familiar with the SBIR CTR programs, what that proposal process will look like. Everyone will have to submit some sort of proposal package for these programs. And then what sort of SBIR and STTR proposal development resources exist here in New Mexico, as well as across the country. Okay. So the Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR program, and a Small Business Technology Transfer, or STTR programs, are really focused on helping startups and small businesses transform high-risk, high-impact technologies into marketable products and services that solve problems. And what do those problems encompass? That covers not only problems that you identify as a small company, but also problems that our nation is facing. There are certain goals for these programs. First, to meet federal R&D needs for providing research dollars to small businesses. Then they're looking to commercialize those technologies from that R&D funding. They want to stimulate technological innovation. They want to foster and encourage participation and innovation and entrepreneurship by socially and economically disadvantaged persons and communities. And then that STTR program, which is a sister program of SBIR, there's a focus there to foster technology transfer through cooperative R&D between small businesses and research institutions. Research institutions can range across different universities, research labs, nonprofits, support organizations, things like that. If you have questions of if something falls into the category of a research institution, don't hesitate to reach out. To be eligible for the SBIR and STTR programs, you need to be organized for profit with a place of business located in the United States. More than 50% of the business needs to be owned or controlled by individuals who are citizens or permanent residents of the United States. And you need to be considered a small business, so you need to have less than 500 employees. And for these programs, there really is a focus on performing R&D. So as you're writing your proposal package, make sure that you aren't saying, we need this money in order to buy more equipment or commercialize a technology that already exists, or we already know how to solve this problem, we just need a little bit more money. SBIR and STTR is really focused on those high-risk, high-impact technologies. Think about this as funding that you can use to test the feasibility of an idea that you as a startup or a small business would never really have that capital laying around to do so. Really leverage SBIR and STTR for this. One thing to keep in mind, though, as I go through this presentation and webinar, is that there are 11 participating agencies within this program. Every agency is going to have its own initiatives, directives, and sometimes that definition of R&D can change slightly. So as you approach a organization or an agency that is providing SBIR funds, don't hesitate to reach out to FAST, and we can help you kind of navigate if your R&D fits within their definitions. Before you start writing that proposal package, make sure that you have an innovative concept. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean technology. It could be products, it could be services. It really has to be, though, an innovative approach to how things are done now, or the status quo. Make sure that you have an understanding of your customer, which also, if you are going after a contracting agency, which I'll cover shortly, includes the agency. You should be able to translate the scientific method to a work plan or an R&D plan. You need to follow directions explicitly. A lot of these opportunities, they have solicitations that they release. Those solicitations have a lot of requirements. Even if you have a great idea, if all the I's aren't dotted and the X's crossed, you may be administratively disqualified. So make sure that you really are looking over those requirements very in much detail. There are multiple registrations required for the SBIR and STTR programs. There are general ones, but then there's also agency-specific ones. You also need to start kind of thinking about the development of a team or partnerships. Are you SBIR ready? Do you have all of the resources that you will need to complete your proposed work plan? If not, start building that team and start pulling in those partnerships that will help you out. And then you also need to have time management skills. All of these awards cover projects for specific periods of performances. Are you able to deliver on a time scale that is presented by the federal government? Now you may be wondering, why should I go after SBIR, STTR? Well, it's equity-free investment into your company. Non-dilutive funding, so the federal government, they want to give you money for that R&D, and they are not going to take a share of your company. It allows you to demonstrate the feasibility of your idea. Again, how often do you have, a few $100,000 laying around to just test the feasibility of a project? It allows you to start building a team and build your company for success. So you don't need to have everyone hired right now or as you're writing that proposal package. You need to have that team brought on for that start of your period of performance. It can help provide due diligence for follow-on funding. The government is vetting your technology through that initial phase, and I'll talk about the phases here shortly. But then following that initial phase, there's phase 2 opportunities, phase 2B opportunities that can really take that technology to the next level. It allows you to map your product and value proposition to your intended customer. You as a startup, you are able to determine who that customer is going to be and really write that proposal package and your go-to-market plan for that customer. If you're going after contracts or with contracting agencies, they're going to be your initial intended customer, but then you can also talk about dual use, and we'll chat about that here shortly. It reduces the need to self-fund R&D, which is expensive. And how many times does a startup have that kind of money lying around for the feasibility testing of an idea? It's not very often. There are IP and data rights in place to protect the small business as you go through the program. And then you, with successful phase 1 and phase 2s, you can position yourself for sole source government contracts. Okay, so just a brief overview of the SBIR and STTR program. The SBIR, every agency is an SBIR agency. Once they reach a certain threshold of extramural R&D budget of $1 billion, they also become STTR agencies. Something to keep in mind, though, as you approach these programs, small business is always going to be the applicant and the awardee. Even if you are working with a research institution like a university, the small business is going to be going to hold that award. A little bit more differences between the two different programs. So with SBIR, you're allowed to partner, but you aren't required to partner. And I'll talk about the differences and percentages here shortly. The principal investigator must be primarily employed by the small business, so of a 40-hour work week, at least 50%. For that work requirement within SBIR, the small business can outsource up to 33% of the work during phase 1 and then up to 50% of the work during phase 2. A formal IP agreement is not required, but if you are bringing on other businesses or contractors or partners, it's not a bad idea to have some sort of IP agreement in place. And then 11 agencies participate in SBIR, and their extramural R&D budgets are greater than 100 million. For STTR, it's a little bit different because they look for that agreement between research institutions and small businesses to really transfer technology out of the research institution space. For partnering here, you are required to bring in a research institution partner. For that PI of that research institution partner, they can either be employed by the research institution or the small business. That really depends on the agency. And again, as you approach these programs, reach out with any questions so we can help you navigate those pieces. Some agencies allow that PI to come from the research institution. Others want that PI still coming from that small business. For their work requirement, instead of a conversation of maximums like it is with SBIR, it's a conversation of minimums. So for STTR, the small business needs to complete at least 40% of the work, while that research partner completes at least 30% of the work. And then there's an additional 30% that's discretionary, and the small business can decide, are we going to take on a little bit more work, or is that going to be placed on that research institution? There is a requirement for a formal IP agreement. And again, this is to protect the small business. If you are working with a research institution, they're going to look out for themselves. And that IP agreement really helps to support and protect that small business and your intellectual property. And then 6 agencies participate in STTR. It was 5 last year. A new agency just joined, USDA. And again, that really depends on the extramural R&D budget. Once they reach $1 billion or exceed $1 billion, they can switch over to STTR as well. So here's just a little visual of those work requirements. So for SBIR, the small business can, if they want to, they don't have to, they can complete 100% of the work, but they can outsource up to 33% of the work. For STTR, the small business needs to complete 40%, the research institution partner needs to complete 30%, and then there's that additional 30% that's discretionary. Something to keep in mind, working with the research institutions within STTR can be pretty expensive. So typically that discretionary 30% will typically go to that research institution, cover overhead and things like that. So the SBIR and STTR programs are gated programs, meaning there are phases, and to be eligible for the following phase, you need to be successful in the one that you're currently in. If you don't have an active SBIR, STTR contract or grant right now, you are in what we're calling a phase 0. This is where you're reaching out to FAST organizations across different states, utilizing microgrants, looking at working with different support organizations to really work on that proposal package. So during phase 0, you're working on that proposal package, and keep in mind, even though it's non-dilutive funds, it doesn't mean that you don't have to put work and effort into it. It'll typically take about 120 hours to put together a really strong and competitive phase 1 proposal package. For phase 1, there you really focus on feasibility testing. Is my idea possible? What are those make it or break it technical challenges that we have to overcome to show that it's feasible in either a certain environment or how that contracting agency wants it applied. For phase 1 awards, typically there's about a 15% success rate of submission, and that isn't usually the first time round. Many folks have to apply at least 2 to 3 times. It's a very competitive program. But as you apply to phase 1, you do receive feedback and comments based on the proposal packages that you have submitted. And we always recommend wait until the next solicitation is, or that next application cycle is available, and apply one more time, really taking into account the comments that were provided. For phase 1, the dollar amounts range slightly. Typically, it's 100 to 200 to upwards of 250,000 for a period of performances of 6 to 12 months. There are exceptions to that. Some agencies have smaller periods of performances with a little bit lower awards, and I'll talk about those here shortly. Following phase 1, small businesses and startups become eligible to apply for phase 2. Just because you've had a successful phase 1 does not mean your project or kind of that prototyping phase is going to be accepted into phase 2. There is still about a 45 to 50% success rate from folks transitioning from phase 1 to phase 2. We have, it happens a lot where somebody or small business has had a really successful phase 1, they apply for phase 2 and they're selected but not funded. So that's something to keep in mind, that it is, even though you have successful phase 1, it is still very competitive. Make sure that during that phase 1, you really are connecting with your contract managers, the grant managers, and really make sure that you are aligning to what their needs are to really make yourself competitive for that phase 2. Phase 2 awards really focus on prototype development, and depending on the agency, depending on the needs of that agency, there can be additional funding for phase 2. So some agencies, they'll have phase 2A, phase 2B, really depends on the agency and the funds that they have available. For that award amount and period of performance, for phase 2 typically ranges from $500,000 to $1.5 million for a period of performance over 24 months or 2 years. So overall, this program does take a while, and you're also waiting a while to hear back from them. But again, it is non-dilutive funding and it is federal investment into your technology and business. After a successful phase 2, small businesses and startups enter phase 3, and that is our commercial sales period. There isn't any direct SBIR funding, but different agencies have funding to help startups and applicants have a successful phase 3 transition. If you're working with a granting agency, and we'll talk about which agencies fall in that realm, they will want you to find that customer. So you need to be completing customer discovery activities during phase 1 and phase 2 to have a successful phase 3 transition. For contracting agencies, you're trying to sell your technology to the contracting agency. So their phase 3 looks a little bit different. You are, though, having conversations during that prototype building phase with those contract managers to determine, hey, is this what you're looking for? Is this what you're looking to buy at the end of this 2-year period of performance? Okay, and then just a little visual of the agencies participating in this program. There's 11 agencies. The Department of Commerce is split up into 2 groups, into NIST and NOAA, but they are SBIR agencies here. So everybody, all the agencies that are presented participate in SBIR. The ones that are in gray also participate in STTR. So again, every agency is an SBIR agency, and once their extramural R&D budget exceeds $1 billion, they become an STTR agency as well. And all of these agencies, they have different things that they focus on, which really opens the door to many different kinds of startups as they approach SBIR and STTR. We have an SF that really focuses on all things in scientific and engineering disciplines, minus any sort of clinical trials or drug discovery. But if you're working in that field, there is NIH or HHS that really allow those clinical trials and allow for new solutions for the health of Americans. If you're looking into food or agriculture or helping conservation of natural resources, the USDA is a really good opportunity. And this agency also allows startups to take a technology that already exists and apply it to a new market or a new community with their commercial off-the-shelf topics. We also have DoD or Department of Defense. They're really contracting agency, the largest agency within the SBIR and STTR programs, really focusing on supporting warfighters in the field, but also making sure that their lives are great when they aren't deployed. So a lot of these agencies, they have multiple directives, multiple missions, different directions that they're going in the next 5 to 10 years. It's really important that you are looking at what the mission of that agency is as you're writing your SBIR and STTR proposal packages. So there's these 11 agencies that participate, and not to make it even more confusing, but each one of them has, or many of them, they have additional components. So Department of Defense, they have their own topics that they release, but also within there's Air Force, Army, Navy, etc., different service components that are going to release different contracting opportunities for needs that arise and that they may need. If we look at DHS, same thing there. They have just 7 different components. If you look at HHS, which we typically call NIH because there is most of HHS is built up of those NIH institutes, but there are 3 other agencies there, including the ACL, the CDC, and the FDA. If you look at DOC or Department of Commerce, there you see NIST and NOAA are housed under there. You have Department of Energy. They have different offices that release topics that fit within SBIR and STTR. Again, if you look at Department of Transportation, similar piece there. Something to keep in mind, not only are there the larger agency requirements, the larger agency missions, but many of these agencies, they have subcomponents that will also have their own directions and needs. And to talk a little bit more about the agencies, there are differences across the board. So their proposal submission processes can differ. They may have different portals or submission portals where they'll want those applications submitted. The requirements vary, depending on, sometimes there'll be changes in format, layout, page counts, content expectations. The funding levels will vary as well. The periods of performances will vary. Some agencies have one solicitation a year, others have at least 3. Some are open all year round, others can release solicitations as needed. So there's a lot of change there. Communication with topic authors or program managers also vary. If you're going after a contracting agency, they're not available to be contacted as much as granting agencies are. Contracting agencies, there is that pre-solicitation period that folks really need to utilize to connect with those technical points of contacts. There's different registration requirements, which I'll cover shortly. And then that funding vehicle varies. So again, that contracting versus granting agencies. For registrations, there are 4 of them that every agency will require, but other than that, they will have different registration requirements depending on which agency you're interested in. So all these agencies, as you are submitting that full proposal package, they want you to be a registered small business. So you will need that EIN. You also need a UEI, a unique entity identifier. They transitioned to using this away from DUNS a few years ago. So if you still have an active DUNS, or if you remember having an active DUNS, sign into the sam.gov website and get that updated. And it's just kind of like a little click once you're in there. There are SBA registrations that you need to complete, and that can be completed on SBIR.gov. And then every agency is going to need that SAM registration, or System of Award Management. But other than that, the agencies have additional different registration requirements. These agencies will also have different submission portals. Most of them use grants.gov. DoD uses the DSIP portal. NSF just switched away from Fastlane and switched to using that research.gov page. And then you see other agencies, they have their own requirements there. Again, so keep that in mind. So not only are you creating a different proposal package for every agency, there are going to be different registration requirements. So I've mentioned granting and contracting agencies a few times now, and I just want to briefly touch on what the difference is between grants and contracts. So grants, typically it's going to be less specific topics. And the perfect example of a granting agency is the NSF. NSF has topic categories, but within that category, the applicant is really able to define their scope of work. A grant is also a flexible instrument designed to provide funds to support a public purpose. Again, as you are writing your proposal package, you get to define what that is, and you get to write and align your proposal package and your proposal to initiatives and directives of that granting agency. The principal investigator, PI, has more freedom in defining that scope of work. Some granting agencies will provide a little bit more guidance. For example, Department of Energy, they just released their topics and have an open solicitation right now. But there they will have a topic, and then within that topic, they will list, we want it within this range. We slightly want the scope of work, but how you get there, that's up to the small business, and the small business defines the scope there. You have more flexibility in the use of funds because you are able to define that scope of work for yourself. It requires best efforts in research. So for example, if you're going through a granting agency or going through your grant and you have to pivot, that is okay. The granting agency wants to see how you are pivoting and how that is still reaching to that end goal. Questions and answers about the solicitation are typically not made public, and you're able to connect with those program managers or those program managers pretty much whenever. And then the applicant will define that scope of work. For contracts, slightly different, going to be highly focused topics. And a really good example of a contracting agency is Department of Defense. They have very specific needs. They need to work under very specific parameters. And that's what those topics and those contracts will look like. They'll tell you exactly what they need and how it needs to perform. That contract is a binding agreement between a buyer and a seller for goods and services. So when you sign that contract, that contracting agency is expecting for you to deliver on what you promised. The scope of work is fairly inflexible. Again, you're solving problems that they have identified, and they need those problems solved. So they're not really asking you to explore a certain idea. They need the specific problem solved. Depending on the type of contract that you have with these agencies, payments are based on deliverables and milestones, with more fiscal requirements. And then there is a requirement of the delivery of promised goods and services determined by that contract type. So at the end of your period of performance, typically after phase 2, after that prototyping phase, they typically want whatever that contract is agreed upon, they want that delivered to that contracting customer. Also, for conversations and questions about the solicitations, they will typically be made public after that pre-solicitation period is over. So during pre-solicitation, you can contact the technical points of contact or the topic managers, ask questions. But keep in mind, if you ask questions that they deem gives you a competitive advantage against other folks competing for that contract, they will be made public. So make sure that when you go into those conversations, you are not releasing any proprietary information, releasing any proprietary direction that you're going in. Really use those meetings with those technical points of contact to see if you are framed in the way that they're envisioning it. And then the government defines that scope of work. They're going to tell you exactly what they need, when they need it by, and how they need it to function. So really make sure that you are connecting with your contracting officer, which you'll have one within the agency as you work through this, and make sure that you are aligning with what they need and what they envision things looking like. And so the differences between agencies participating in contracts versus grants. On the left side, we have those contracting agencies, perfect examples, DoD and NASA. And then on the granting side, we have NSF, or the National Science Foundation, DOE, Department of Energy. In the middle, we have HHS, NIH falls under there. They release both grants and contracts. So something to keep in mind, typically more grant leaning, but they do have contract opportunities fairly often. Okay, and so every one of these agencies is going to have different ceilings for phase 1 and phase 2, and then different periods of performances. For most of these agencies, especially for the larger ones, we're reaching kind of closer to 300K for a phase 1 with a period of performance typically 6 to 12 months. Air Force under DoD, they have a smaller award where it's called the Commercial Solutions Openings, where you as a small business are able to pitch an idea and a solution to a problem that Air Force has not yet identified. Those are a little bit shorter, with a period of performance of 3 months and then a award ceiling of about 75K. And then you see with phase 2, periods of performances, they increase to 2 years, and then those award amounts do as well. You'll be going through prototyping for phase 2, which takes a lot more time and money. And then, for example, agencies like USDA, if you are, for example, growing crops or have an innovative approach to growing crops, and you're already talking to that program manager or contract officer, and they know that, for example, your crop's not going to be able to grow in just, 18 months. There is opportunities to extend that period of performance, but that is a conversation that you need to be having with those program managers and contract officers for the duration of your projects. Very briefly, for data rights and IP protection, any data that is generated through a SBIR STTR is protected for a minimum of 20 years. It used to be 4 years. They've increased it slightly. I think everybody's realizing it takes a little while to get through SBIR and STTR, anywhere from waiting for an answer on your proposal package to actually going through that R&D testing. So your data is protected for 20 years. And the government does want to use the data or the technology that is developed. They receive a royalty-free license, but again, it is protected for the small business. There is a lot of tutorials on data rights on the SBIR.gov webpage, and when I send this presentation out, y'all can access that with that link on the bottom. Okay, so SBIR and STTR, there are 2 pieces that really drive this program, innovation and commercialization. A lot of folks that approach SBIR for the first time, especially if they're coming from the research field, they really focus on this innovation piece. We have a new idea, we have a new technology, a new process. It's going to be revolutionary. Something that I always try to coach folks out of is just, we can't be doing science for the sake of science. We can't be exploring new ideas just for the sake of exploring it and, wanting to gain more knowledge. There has to be that commercialization piece where we're focusing on delivering that product to marketplace, wherever that marketplace may be. We're really creating a product that is matching with those end users and customers that you are defining as you are going along. So as you move through phase 1 and phase 2, yes, there's a really big focus on R&D, but there also needs to be a focus on commercialization. Most of the agencies provide TABA funding, or technical and business assistance funding, ranging from 6,500 for phase 1 and then 50,000 for phase 2, that allow the small business to start making traction in that commercialization portion, which I always recommend for folks to do. During phase 1, you should be using that $6,500 to find new customers, to better your marketing strategy. If you don't have business expertise on your team, use that TABA funding to bring that expertise to your team. You want to be successful when you do transition just out of R&D and then into sales, and that TABA funding can be really beneficial there. And so really briefly covering what innovation is, the definition depends on the agency mission, directives, current need, and budget. A lot of folks, when they think of innovation, they think of, high tech or novel. They a lot of times think this needs to be a brand new technology. But really think, innovation comes in many different shapes and forms. It can be products, processes, services, any change from the status quo. How are you going to make something easier, faster, cheaper for the federal government or for your end users and customers? Keep that in mind as you approach that innovation piece. And then, for technological complexity, it really depends on what you are proposing. What is that impact that your technology is going to have? Is this scalable? Can you scale it out from just being a product for DoD to something that is dual use, something that we can transform later and sell it to the commercial marketplace? Really, the focus for these innovations is they need to be solution oriented. So what products, services, processes are you developing that are going to deliver a solution to whichever marketplace you're targeting? And then, some like the USDA and then some DoD service components, you can use commercial off-the-shelf technologies, so technologies that already exist or have a higher TRL level, and then actually apply them to problems that you have identified for those agencies. And innovation can really start anywhere in that product or idea chain. Some agencies like technologies with a little bit of a higher TRL level. Other agencies are interested in a little bit of a lower TRL level. This isn't something you have to navigate on your own. You can reach out to a FAST site, and I'll chat a little bit about those here at the end, but we can really help you navigate that. We hold one-on-ones where we talk about what is that technology, what is that direction that you're going in, and then really talk about what agencies would be a good match for you. Some agencies don't even want to touch anything that's TRL 7 through 9. Others are, that's the only ones that we're focusing on. So again, lots of nuances, lots of differences between all 11 participating agencies, and we're really here to help you navigate all of that. So in addition to innovation, here's this commercialization piece. So commercialization in the SBIR CTR framework, it really is a process of bringing this technology to market. You really need to emphasize as you're writing the marketability of your product, even if it is something that is geared towards DoD and is or under a contracting agency. A lot of those agencies are still going to ask, what is the dual use application of your product? And then again, really finding where your product fits within the market. What is that fit that it has? And there are programs like I-Core or that focus on customer discovery. It is recommended that you go through those programs before you apply for SBIR's TTR. You want to be ready for SBIR's TTR, which means that you really understand what your marketplace looks like and how it changes and how there's nuances in there as well. Part of that commercialization strategy also looks into bringing on folks to bringing folks onto your team that have that business background or that have that background of being able to commercialize a technology. It also focuses on how are you going to handle IP? Are you going to be selling your product? Are you going to be licensing your product? All of that fits within that commercialization strategy. As you develop it, really focus on your value proposition, describe how your technology solves a problem or meets a need in other ways that others don't. Typically when somebody says, there's nothing else that's out there like mine, I'll hit back with, well, it's the status quo. Your competition is the status quo. How are you better, more efficient, and cheaper than the status quo? And really keep that in mind as you are writing your commercialization pieces of your proposal packages. Really focus on that business model, develop a plan for how you will create, deliver, and capture value. Have that customer discovery piece, identify your first potential customer, their needs and their buying behaviors. Many times when I coach folks through SBIR and STTR, they say, well, this can be applied in all of these different markets. Yeah, obviously, it's a really great technology. It has a lot of merit. But as a small startup, you're not going to capture 50% of the marketplace. What is going to be that niche that you start with? What is going to be that niche where you're going to prove the government's return on investment or prove your concept out in the marketplace? And then really focus on that path to market. How are you going to sell your technology? If you are going after a contracting agency, there is that initial interest of them buying that product. But then they also, again, they want you to focus on that dual use. How will you jump from just working in the defense world to also switching over to commercial world? And most agencies, if they don't already have one, they are working on developing commercialization requirements. It looks different from phase 1 to phase 2. Here are just general phase 1 requirements for that commercialization strategy. Something also to keep in mind, reviewers know that as an applicant to phase 1, you're a startup. You typically have a smaller team. Your commercialization strategy is not going to be perfect. They know that, going through phase 1, through that feasibility testing, maybe even some customer discovery during that time, there might be a pivot in your commercialization strategy, and that is okay. They also expect those TABA, or those technical and business assistance funds, to be utilized during phase 1. So you develop that commercialization strategy as you go forward. So they understand that when you apply to phase 2, it looks a little bit different than phase 1. That is okay, and that is something that is expected. Okay, and then just a brief overview of the proposal process. So before you even start writing, because again, it is 120 plus hours for your first competitive SBIR STTR proposal. See if you're eligible. Are you a small business? Are you structured to be for profit? A lot of times folks approach me, they're really interested in SBIR STTR, but they're nonprofits, and nonprofits are not eligible for SBIRs, but that's okay. There are different avenues that you can explore to get funding, and if you are really interested in SBIR and you find this great match, then really consider spinning up a for-profit kind of sister to your nonprofit. Is it primarily US owned? So at least 51%. All of the work needs to be done in the US. Is that something that is possible with what you are proposing? And then the PI, again, depending on if you're going on SBIR STTR, and then depending on the agency, but that PI needs to be primarily employed by the small business. And then, develop that innovative idea, really start crafting what you are going to propose to these federal agencies, and really craft that commercialization pathway, knowing that things may change, right? As I start these as I write proposal packages or grants, I typically don't want to get super attached to the words that are on the page. So I won't write full paragraph. I'll make an outline, a 5-page outline that really talks about, what are the broader impacts? How does it align? How is it significant to the agency? And I'll just jot down ideas. Then as those become a little bit more solidified, then I start adding, really the hefty part of it. I start actually putting the actual paragraph on paper. But really make sure that you have those two really important pieces. How is your product process? or technology? How is that innovative? And then how will it also be commercialized? Following that, really make sure that you are completing those registrations, SAM registrations. Take a little bit of time. I've had folks that have a full proposal package, have been writing it for a few months now, and they go into sam.gov and they see that their registration is expired. Make sure that you log in there before you can start writing. Make sure that your SAM ID is there as well as your UEI. Those are going to be necessary, especially now as you are submitting that proposal package. Research.gov and grants.gov, they've kind of switched it up where a small business or an applicant will type in their UEI for a workspace or start working on that proposal package within that submission portal. So you really want to make sure that that UEI is ready to go. If you are struggling, there was a disconnect from when, you know, DUNS was, they got rid of DUNS and they went to UEI. A lot of folks were having trouble generating those UEIs. There are support organizations across the country that can help you with that. Feel free to reach out to a FAST site, and we're more than happy to connect you to some of those organizations, but know that there's processes in place to help you get that connected. And then you want to make sure you have that SBA company registration that really focuses on the commercialization that you've already experienced with your small business, and that can be completed on SBIR.gov. And then those agency specific registrations. So what I always recommend is when you have all your registrations in place, jump into a submission portal and see if everything is connected. Everything needs to be connected. That submission portal needs to be able to pick up your UEI. If that isn't working, stop right there and start trying to solve that problem. There isn't a point in writing 120 plus hours for a really good proposal package if you can't submit it. Depending on the agency, you can also, while you are completing those registrations, start talking to program managers, technical points of contact, depending on which agency you're going after. Again, the conversation is going to be either allowed or not. Look at that solicitation, see if you do meet what they're looking for. Can you deliver on what they are actually looking to fund? And make sure that you are aligning, you know, not just right now with what their mission is right now, but also looking at years in the future. So 5 to 10 years from now, are you still going to be aligned with what they're hoping to achieve or deliver to the market? Really make sure that you're having those conversations beforehand. And I always say, you know, maybe 20 years ago, a really good idea would have been enough for SBIR STTR. Nowadays, there's so many good and highly competitive ideas. It is really important to connect with the agencies and make sure that, one, they know who you are, you're building that rapport with the agencies as well. And again, saving yourself a little bit of time. You know, what if you approach NSF, you have this really great idea, and they, you know, let you know right away, hey, this is not something we're funding for the next X years, you should most likely go to this agency. And that happens often. Agency program managers, they know each other and they want to save startups time. They know how valuable your time is. So if you aren't aligned, they'll most likely recommend an agency or technical point of contact that works better for you. And then for that proposal package, it's going to differ for every agency, but typically there's going to be some sort of technical volume or technical proposal where you're talking about what you're going to be completing, how it aligns with the agency directives, their missions. You're going to need to pull together resumes or bio sketches for folks that are going to be on your senior team or senior personnel, key personnel. Every agency calls it something different. So as you are navigating those solicitations, just kind of keep that in mind. You're going to have to describe the facilities that you either have or need access to complete all of the R&D. As you are writing a proposal package, make sure you always ask yourself, do I need a mass spec? Okay, if I do, then I need to make sure that I have access to it. So you can't just propose something in the R&D without actually showing how you're going to get those resources. You're going to need a budget and budget justification, and then there may be additional documents required depending on that agency. If you are going after the STTR route, keep in mind that research institutions move really, really slow. You typically have to reach out to them as soon as you find alignment or have interest and start asking for certain documentation from them. So you're going to need a letter of commitment. That research institution is going to have to provide their own budget and budget justification. And they're also going to have to include their own bio sketches for those key personnel. Then make sure you review and leave enough time for review. Organizations like New Mexico FAST, we're more than happy to review your SBIR CTR proposals. Something to keep in mind, if you are waiting, the week before, most likely other folks are as well. If you want a thorough and really deep review, make sure that you are contacting program managers of different FAST sites along the process. We have no problem reading different sections, supporting you through different sections, but keep in mind that if you're kind of sending it over to us as that submission date comes closer, we are going to have multiple proposals to be looking at. And then make sure that you submit at least 1 day before the application is due. I don't even like waiting 1 day before. Submission portals have a tendency to shut down or break or have issues right before proposal packages are due. So give yourself a few days to submit everything, make sure everything is connected the way it should be, make sure your UEI is being registered the right way. So give yourself at least a day, but I typically say 3 to 5 days before that proposal package is due. And then you wait. And this is the hardest piece about the SBIR and CTR programs. As a small business, as a startup, you're moving rapidly. You're trying to find resources and funding in many different directions. Many times it's difficult to wait, 3 to 6 months for an answer from that agency. So keep that in mind. SBIR shouldn't be your only business plan. It should be something that's included in your business plan, but it shouldn't be the only way that you are pulling money in. Some agencies and different components of the proposal packages have a shorter wait time for you to hear back. For example, NSF, they have about a 30-day period, and you'll hear back from if you've submitted a project pitch, if it's aligned or not. Some agencies or some service components like Department of Defense's Air Force, some of their opportunities you'll hear back within 30 days, and then within those, on the 30th day, you start working, your peer performance starts. So there's a little, again, nuances between all of the agencies, not something you have to navigate on your own. We're more than happy to help you at any of the FAST sites. Okay, talking about some proposal development resources. I've mentioned FAST sites pretty frequently during this workshop or webinar. The Small Business Administration has different FAST sites or federal and state technology partnership sites across almost every state at this point. I think there's only a handful of states. There they provide free support for technical business assistance as you are going through writing that proposal package. We do a lot of outreach where we want to make sure that you understand what is going on within these different agencies, what those little nuances are. And then many of these agencies have financial support through micro grants. And then just very briefly about the NMFAST offerings. So we have free SBIR TTR proposal development assistance, but we really tailor our services to each client. We work with all 11 of the agencies participating in SBIR and TTR, and every day looks a little bit different. Sometimes we're very DoD heavy, other times we're a little bit more NSF leaning, sometimes more NIH. That is okay. If you ever have a question, we're more than happy to really curate services for where you're at right now. Even if you have a phase 1 and now you're transitioning over to phase 2, not 100% sure what direction to go in, feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to help. We also have micro grants of up to $2,000 to help with anything that would make your SBIR TTR proposal a little bit more competitive. We used to really direct them towards proposal development. Now we're changing slightly to offer more travel stipends so that you're able to get to those conferences and have conversations with those program managers and technical points of contact. We offer free workshops and engagement activities held throughout the state of New Mexico, and we partner with a lot of different FAST sites to make sure that we're able to support different ecosystems across the country. We really focus on making all of our resources available on your own time. Not everybody has availability throughout the day to jump onto a webinar or be part of one of our accelerators. So we have self-paced SBIR TTR courses. We have different tools, we have templates, things like that. And then we have a pretty extensive video series covering everything within SBIR and STTR. And then we hold an annual SBIR and STTR Innovation Summit. I'll talk about that here in a little bit. And it's coming up here in exactly a month from today. In addition to FAST sites, the SBA has online tutorials. If you go to sbir.gov, focused on different things, some more on budgeting, others on that technical piece. There is that data rights and IP protections course. So they update those courses as things go on. They have different tools there as well. It's a good little piece to kind of just explore. But if you have any specific questions, just reach out to a FAST site. Many times as folks approach SBIR TTR, they just have an innovative idea, but they don't necessarily have that business formed around it. We typically would recommend for folks to contact small business development centers or SBDCs. They're located across the country, across different cities, and they're really there to help you with that business development. How do you start up your business? How should you format and structure your business as you approach SBIR and STTR? In addition to SBDCs, there is another organization called Apex Accelerators. They help with that contracting piece, and they help with a lot of registrations like SAM and UEI. So if you're having problems there, reach out to a FAST site, and we're more than happy to connect you to a Apex Accelerator. And again, always reach out to SBIR and STTR agencies. This is the easiest way to see what they're looking for, what they're actually funding. I sign up to every listserv. They don't send out a lot of information, but they do send out information that is very pertinent to folks that are interested in SBIR and STTR. And sometimes when there is additional funding available, they'll blast it on their listserv, and that would be just the best way for folks to see what is available. And then for upcoming events, we have our annual SBIR STTR Innovation Summit. It's going to be held on December 13th. It is going to be virtual. We'll have different panels focused on everything SBIR STTR. And we'll also have opportunities for folks to have one-on-ones with different program managers where you can really ask and start talking about that alignment piece. Do you align with what they're looking for and what they're funding within, the next 5 to 10 years. And you can get tickets down here. That will be it for my webinar. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is here. And again, I'll be sending this webinar out to everybody that has registered. And if you need to get connected to another FAST site, if you're not in New Mexico, not a problem at all. We have a pretty tight network. Program managers work really, really closely with each other. We're more than happy to get you connected to the right folks. And then I see there are a few questions. So first question, when you refer to the SBIR budget, is that a spread across agencies? Yes, so the agencies will have different budget caps. Let me take you back really quick. So if you look over here on the right-hand side, the agencies are going to have different amounts that they release per funding cycle, which typically is a fiscal year. They don't have to give out all of the money. That's something to keep in mind. And sometimes, they'll say we have, let's say, 10 million, but nobody applied to a certain topic. So then they're going to take some of that 10 million and move it over to another topic as well. So agencies have the ability to move that money around for it to make the most impact. The next question, can you submit multiple SBIR proposals under one small business entity? If so, can it be within a single agency? Depends. Some agencies allow it, others do not. So for example, Department of Energy, they have topics released right now. Kind of like NSF, they have a like a two-step system. The first thing you do is submit a letter of intent. You can submit up to 10 of those letters of intent. If they're found responsive, you are invited to submit a full proposal package. They'll only let you know if it's found non-responsive. And again, you have 10 pieces there. There's nuances. So open topics within Department of Defense, you're only allowed to apply per one application per open topic. And for all of them, they'll take, the most recent. So if you submit 30 to DOE, they'll look at the most recent 10. If you submit 2 to DOD, they'll look at the most recent one. NSF, so with NSF, you can submit one project pitch per submission cycle, and there are 3 per year. So NSF is typically open all year round, since they are the 3, and they kind of, span the full year. But what they want is submit a project pitch, hear back from them. So you submit a project pitch, you hear back from them, then you have a full year to submit that proposal package. If it's accepted, if it's not accepted, you can submit another project pitch within the next submission cycle. And they're typically about, 3.5 months each. Another question within DoD, is there a single office that manages all the SBIR budget? No, every service component has kind of their own managing entity. Even with topics, and again, the budget will drive the topics. There is the broad agency announcement. DoD has 3 of those a year. But that doesn't mean that there's only 3 solicitations. So DoD has many solicitations a year, all of them with their own budget across service components, really making sure that they're getting resources for the problems that they have identified. And then I believe we have time for maybe one more question, if there is one. Awesome. Well, my email is here. Feel free to send me any questions that may arise as you explore SBIR's TTR. I will be sending this presentation, the PowerPoint slides, and the recording out to everyone here in the next few hours. If any questions arise, please feel free to contact us, and good luck on your SBIR and its TTR journeys.